Hello, welcome to another episode of Unworthy History. Now, today we're going to talk about some of the events surrounding the conspiracy, Aaron Burr's conspiracy of 1806, in which he was accused of treason, and probably more validly, he was accused of trying to plot an attack on Spanish Mexico. So he wanted to revolutionize Spanish Mexico in the event that the U.S. went into war with Spain. So, surrounding these events, one of Burr's associates was a man by the name of Samuel Swartwout. Now, this is the only picture I have of Swartwout, and this actually occurred at the time that he was only 23 years old. So this picture is quite a bit older, but Swartwout was involved in Burr's conspiracy, and along with Burr, another person that was originally involved in the conspiracy was James Wilkinson. Now, Wilkinson has been described as a liar and a scoundrel, one of the kind of worst people of that revolutionary period. He was actually a double agent with Spain, so he was in the pay of Spain for many years, starting in the 1780s. And then he basically got paid by Spain again to avert going into war. Jefferson and his cabinet had sent him orders saying that he could basically start a war with Spain. And then Burr kind of wanted him to do that as well, because then Burr, along with his associates and his platoon that he had basically recruited, they would invade Spanish Mexico and take over that. And then Burr had also told other people that after that, they would take over part of the western United States, so west of the Appalachian Mountains, and then maybe even march on Washington. So that's what got Jefferson involved. Jefferson had kind of sat back during this whole time that Burr was engaging in these schemes with Wilkinson and Swartwout and others. Jefferson had kind of set back. He had ignored many warnings. The first came from Joseph Hamilton Davis, the federal prosecutor of Kentucky. I've done a whole series on him if you're interested in that. But Jefferson ignored those first warnings that started in January of 1806, and he only acted around October of 1806. So what happened was Wilkinson basically averted a war with Spain, even though Jefferson and Secretary of War Dearborn were encouraging him to start a war with Spain that could move the U.S. boundary further west into Texas and maybe move it all the way from the Sabine to the Rio Grande River. And so Wilkinson, instead of doing that and starting a war, which they thought they could probably win, that the American force was stronger than the Spanish force massed along the border at that time, instead of doing that, Wilkinson made a deal with Spain, and he was essentially given money, and then they agreed that the certain territory between Texas and Louisiana would be governed by both Spain and the U.S., so this was sort of a no man's land that was only settled in 1819. So all of this occurred in 1806. So Wilkinson, what he did was he basically declared martial law in New Orleans, and he threw Samuel Swartwout into jail. And as he did so, he took even Swartwout's jewelry, which Swartwout later took great offense to. And he basically, without trial, he sent Swartwout and some other conspirators with Burr all the way to Washington, D.C. So later, during Aaron Burr's trial in 1807 in Richmond, Virginia, the tables started turning against Wilkinson. So Jefferson had protected Wilkinson. He had kind of taken Wilkinson's word over and above anything else. And so Jefferson had sort of shielded Wilkinson, and once he heard that Burr had plotted a possible march on the Capitol in Washington during his plot in 1806, Jefferson basically went full force against Burr, and he tried to charge him with treason. And so this led to the trial in 1807. Burr was actually acquitted because there really wasn't a good case against him. Jefferson really didn't bother building much of a case because he felt it was so obvious that Burr had committed these treasonous acts. And so After that trial and during that trial, when Wilkinson was in Virginia, he was really subject to many accusations of being a liar and a scoundrel. And Swartwout basically felt that his honor had been betrayed, and so he challenged Wilkinson to a duel. So what I'm going to show and read now is this letter printed originally in the Virginia Gazette in the fall of 1807. This was reprinted in the Impartial Review and Cumberland Repository on November 26, 1807. So this is basically a letter challenging Wilkinson. Swartwout wrote it to Wilkinson and published it in the papers, basically challenging him to a duel and calling him some names, a coward and a poltroon, for avoiding a duel with Swartwout. Sir, when once the chain of infamy grapples to a knave, every new link creates a fresh sensation of detestation and horror. As it gradually or precipitously unfolds itself, we behold in each succeeding connection and arising from the same corrupt and contaminated source the same base and degenerate conduct. I could not have supposed that you would have completed the catalogue of your crimes by adding to the guilt of treachery, forgery, and perjury the accomplishment of cowardice. But every succeeding day presents you in a new light to the public and plunges you still deeper in crime and ignominy. Having failed in 2 different attempts to procure an interview with you, such as no gentleman of honor could refuse, I have only to pronounce and publish you to the world as a coward and poltroon. One word more before I take my leave. This is a critical moment in the life of your excellency. Your reputation is gone forever, and your life totters on the verge of dissolution. As you cannot pretend to the esteem of any man living, you should have sought a momentary reputation in the applause of even your enemies. You should have been brave and died like a man. Your enemies would have then forgotten the wrongs you had done them. Your country would have been appeased, and even Judas forgiven. You should have considered that there is some small merit in even a villain's bravery. It was all you were supposed to possess this side of the grave. You should have made much of it. It might have served to wipe away some portion of the stain which your treachery and turpitude have fixed upon your character. In consequence of the above publication, which appeared in a Richmond paper, the following certificates were drawn up. It is supposed the note which Mr. Smith had in possession contained a challenge from Mr. Swartwout to General Wilkinson. I certify that on the 20th of October, 1807, between the hours of 4 and 5 p.m. at the Washington Tavern in the city of Richmond, I was on the point of walking out from my lodgings when a knock was heard at the door. I asked the person to walk in, who proved to be Mr. Israel Smith, who was this day discharged from the Circuit Court for Virginia. He asked for General Wilkinson, who was in the room, and to whom I showed him. He asked for a private interview. The general replied that he had no secrets, and if he had anything to contaminate, he could do it where he was. Anything to communicate, he could do it where it was. Smith drew a letter from his pocket and handed it to the general, who asked him from whom it came. Smith again observed that if the general would go in private, he would tell him. The general repeated that he had no secrets and requested Smith to inform him from whom the letter came. Smith said, from Mr. Swartwout. The general handed back the letter unopened and requested Mr. Smith to inform Mr. Swartwout that he held no correspondence with traitors or conspirators. At this moment I stepped out of the room and heard no more. Silas Dinsmore. So that was the witness to Smith was an agent of Burr's, who was dispatching a letter that was basically, an agent of Swartwout, who was dispatching a letter to General Wilkinson challenging him to a duel. We certify that we were present at the interview between Mr. Smith and General Wilkinson, as stated above by Mr. Dunsmore, and pledge ourselves that his narrative is literally correct as far as it goes. We further certify that when Dinsmore left the room, Mr. Smith asked General Wilkinson if he meant his observations to apply to himself. The general observed that he, Smith, might do as he pleased, and added that these are my quarters, and there is the door, please, to walk out. Mr. Smith retired. So that was basically a challenge that was printed in the paper, and Swartwout had challenged Wilkinson, but Wilkinson had refused several attempts to Swartwout's challenge to a duel, and he also refused. This was apparently the third attempt as well. So anyhow, that's some more history surrounding Burr's conspiracy plot in 1806. Basically, it seems that, to me, both Burr and his associates, as well as Wilkinson and Jefferson, all behaved very questionably during this time period. There's no question that Burr was engaged in a plot to overthrow Mexico, and there's no question that he also said many things that were treasonous could be taken as treason against the government. A lot of this was said to foreign agents of Britain and Spain in order so Burr could extract money for them under the possibility that it would weaken the U.S. But Wilkinson is definitely a scoundrel as well. Jefferson basically let him off scot-free for his actions during Burr's conspiracy and sort of propped him up as this key witness in Burr's treason trial, but nevertheless Burr was acquitted due to want of evidence. So anyhow, if you enjoyed hearing stories like these that aren't told on channels like the History Channel, then be sure to like and subscribe. And you can also follow us on Twitter for new updates about our videos. And we'll see you next time on Unworthy History.